Ready? Good morning. Since day one, our mission in this office has been to ensure that every Kentucky family lives in a safe community and has a real path to prosperity. That's a community free from violence and free from drugs. That's ensuring our children are safe from predators, protecting seniors from scam artists, and working to ensure families can afford their basic needs like electricity and water. I know that these are our challenges, and it is up to every state official to do what is in their power to help our families move forward. That's why I'm working with lawmakers to support legislative reforms to help our families. And our legislative package has a few basic values. First, that we must end this drug epidemic in our lifetime. Second, that we must help our struggling families whose bills go up every month, but their wages never seem to go up at all. Third, that we must protect every Kentucky child from violence and exploitation. And fourth, that we must keep our promise to every teacher, police officer, firefighter, social worker, every state, city, and county employee to whom we have made promises, and we must fund their pensions. We all know that the opioid crisis is crippling our families. 30 Kentuckians die a week from this epidemic. But this epidemic arose in our lifetime, and I believe we can end it in our time. That's why I become the most aggressive attorney general in this country at suing opioid manufacturers and distributors. They have made hundreds of billions of dollars fueling this epidemic while our communities have been absolutely devastated. These lawsuits provide the opportunity for that transformational moment where we would have the funding for all the preventative services we need, to provide treatment to every single Kentuckian who is struggling, and to help in recovery to make sure that Kentuckians that have gotten better stay better. So, we must ensure the passage of House Bill 44. This measure would create not just a moral but a legal obligation for every single dollar that we recover in these opioid lawsuits to be spent addressing the epidemic. It would go to treatment efforts, recovery efforts, prevention efforts, and law enforcement. Let me be clear, this is blood money. And while there is always a fiscal crisis in Frankfort, these funds must be spent on addressing this epidemic. We owe it to our families, those that have lost children or children who have lost parents. We owe it to our communities that have been absolutely devastated to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity and show people that something even as devastating as a drug epidemic can be addressed, and that the next generations don't face the same threats that this generation faces. Representative Dennis Keene of Wilder is the primary sponsor of House Bill 44. Dennis?
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank Attorney General Beshear when he called me about putting this bill forward. It's a very simple bill, but will have tremendous results. The whole problem with the opioid addiction problem is that it needs money to address it. And with getting that money quickly in the hands of the people that know how to spend it and use it will curb this problem for us. So I'm very honored to be here today and look forward to its passage to this coming session.
Thanks, Dennis. The Attorney General's office is also pressing a second bill dealing with our opioid epidemic to make sure that everyone who is seeking help is actually getting that help. This bill, which we're working on with Representative Chris Harris, is focused on how we shut down rogue opioid recovery centers. Let me be clear. We have some amazing treatment centers across Kentucky. They do the Lord's work. They get people better and back to their families. But we have found, and we have taken action against, recovery centers that would simply trade cash for scripts, that have people who need help that come in and do not get 1 minute of counseling. We have to ensure that when someone ultimately goes for help, that they get the type of help that they need. Eastern Kentucky and southeastern Kentucky have been hit particularly hard by irresponsible centers only looking to take advantage of those suffering from addiction. They take their money but provide no real treatment. We know these facilities write hundreds of prescriptions just in a couple of hours. The people walk in and out, sometimes in less than 15 minutes, which means they're not getting those skills they need to ultimately cope with a lifetime of addiction. And the resulting crime and disruption wreaks havoc on local police forces and city and county governments. Next, Kentuckians are struggling in meeting their most basic necessities. Our state has the third lowest per capita income in the country. We have the third lowest wage growth in the country. We have twice the number of minimum wage jobs as the national average. So most of our families, at the end of a week, after working 60, 70, or 80 hours, are suffering from anxiety. Why? Because they're doing their part and working hard. But every month their bills seem to go up, but their wages never do. Too often, Kentuckians have to choose between groceries or paying to keep the lights and heat on. Angie and I, Representative Hatton and I, talked to a family a little less than a year ago where the kids' Christmas wish had been that they could get their power turned back on. No Kentucky family should have to live that way. So Representative Harris and Representative Hatton are working with me and my Office of Rate Intervention to strengthen protection for our families against unfair increases in power, water, and gas bills. House Bill 16 would give our families a stronger voice and would instill some extra protections that the PSC could consider that currently they do not. Number one, that any increase would be affordable. If we are going to give our utilities monopolies, which they have to provide power or gas or water, they have to be able to provide those utilities, those basic needs, at a price that all of our families can afford. In a minute, Representative Hatton will tell you what's happening in eastern Kentucky, how many people are having that power shut off every single week. The fact that even a hardworking family has a tough time keeping the lights on. But House Bill 16 will also require regular audits to ensure that a company is acting efficiently, that they are operating well before they can raise our bills. And for the first time, it will include the type of customer service in these decisions that the utilities are providing. If someone is going to raise our rates, they ought to be providing the types of good service that ultimately our families pay for. This bill has never been more timely. We have been fighting day after day in this office to either lower bills or prevent them from being raised at the rate that utilities are asking for. Since 2016, we've opposed dozens of utility hikes and helped save Kentucky businesses and families now nearly $1.2 billion of increases. Yet as we sit here right now, utilities that serve, I believe, up to 60+% of Kentuckians are all asking for a rate increase at the same time. This type of legislation has never been more important. Representative Hatton?
Thank you, General. Thanks very much to Attorney General Andy Beshear for all of his hard work in opposing rate increases, coming down to eastern Kentucky where I'm from and listening to the stories and lending a hand whenever he was needed. Thank you so much for that. And thanks for being a part of this legislation. It's fitting that we talk about legislation that would make utility rates fair on a day when it is so bitterly cold. It brings into sharp focus what it feels like to be cold, to freeze. And so many of us are able to adjust our thermostats without thought for the money that each degree you move it up will cost your family. And where I live, we've been a coal-producing region, and we've powered the country. And it's ironic now that we have some of the highest power bills in the country in eastern Kentucky. Lots of places in Kentucky are suffering. I'm speaking from what I know, and that's about eastern Kentucky, where we have the second highest utility bills in the nation. And this legislation is common sense in that it would allow us to consider affordability in whether or not a rate is fair. And it's kind of hard to believe that that isn't something we consider yet, but it would require that. And it's also compassionate in that it takes into account the fact that there are numerous stories of families who have cordoned off all the rooms but one, and they'll all try to sleep in one room and not heat the rest of them. Or like the general said, the young boy who came to my kid's school and talked about how, you know, he was so happy that for Christmas his family had gotten their power turned back on. And so many people making the decision of whether to stay warm or whether to pay other urgent bills or buy medication. So this bill would also require that the PSC get an audit. Some of the, the PSC would need to never approve rates unless the utility had been audited. And that's to stop exorbitant expenses by the utility companies. We've been hearing some things about CEOs being paid $11.1 million while they're also asking for $380,000 worth of corporate jet travel and billing that back to their customers who don't have gas money to get to the grocery store. So I really hope that this bill will be received favorably in both houses. And again, thanks to the General, and thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Angie. It's also the job of everyone in this Capitol, and I think everyone across this state, to better protect our children. No child in Kentucky should be subjected to violence or exploitation ever. And I hope that this is a priority of everyone who walks into this Capitol each and every day. This legislative session, we're working with Representative Ruth Ann Palumbo to sponsor legislation, House Bill 162, that requires anyone in Kentucky getting a commercial driver's license, a CDL, to take a very short course. It's watching a video on how to recognize and report human trafficking. This is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. And worldwide, it affects over 5 million children alone. And we know, because we have these cases that come to us, that through no fault of its own, the trucking industry is targeted. And they walk these kids. I mean, they target boys and girls aged 12 to 14, and they walk them from cab to cab to cab. But I know in at least one of those cabs is a responsible parent and adult that with the right training will make that call, will help us save that child. And we know it works because they passed this legislation in red states, blue states, purple states, green states. At the end of the day, every place this has been passed, it has helped. And we receive calls in our office from drivers that have been trained in other states. Listen, this is a fight that is very personal to the Attorney General's office. We have taken responsibility to be the lead agency in addressing human trafficking across this Commonwealth. We have 32 active cases right now on human trafficking. And last year, we helped arrest a record 39 human traffickers and other related arrests. This is something that occurs every single day, but we can respond in the way that we need to. And if we have the opportunity to train every single truck driver on the road, those are eyes and ears in so many places in Kentucky and other states that will help us rescue so many more victims. I will say that we have filed this legislation the last 2 sessions, and we haven't received a hearing on it. But it's time. You know, it's time that our legislature did the right thing and not a partisan thing, that ultimately said our kids are more important than who gets credit, and that not only hold a hearing on this, but ultimately pass it through. The industry is in favor of it. It costs our Commonwealth nothing. There is a national nonprofit that helps put together the training, that provides a wallet card, and even provides a card that goes inside the truck itself. In another area to better protect our children, Representative Jeff Donahue joins us in our efforts by sponsoring House Bill 65 that will strengthen Kentucky's fight in cases involving crimes and victims in multiple counties throughout this state by letting the Attorney General's office petition the Supreme Court for a statewide or a multi-county grand jury. The need for this type of bill has been highlighted by the Pennsylvania Attorney General's use of a statewide grand jury to investigate abuse in a religious institution. A provision of Pennsylvania's law allowed for that investigation. Without that law, without that statewide ability and statewide grand jury, the findings that came out of that would still be hidden from the public. Our goal is simple: to fully and finally end any abuse occurring in any institution, and to be able to respond almost immediately to shutting down whether it's statewide human trafficking rings or any other crime occurring in multiple jurisdictions that's harming any Kentuckian. We want to find every victim that's out there, historic or present. We want to provide the services that are needed, and ultimately we want to secure justice for anybody who's been harmed. Representative Jeff Donahue. Thank you.
Thank you, General Beshear. Thanks everybody for being here today. This is important. What you've heard today is this. One thing I want to say about the bill we're looking forward to moving forward is that anytime we can consolidate law enforcement agencies, the men and women that work for the laws and the families that work for those agencies, it's a plus for us. You want to know the law, just ask a criminal. Most of the times they know the law better than we do. So this is an opportunity for us to do something to move forward and make sure that we're not spinning our wheels and we're able to get things accomplished quickly. But what I would like to end on is this. What you've heard today, and one of the most resounding themes, this is common sense legislation. What's been presented to you today is common sense legislation. And so hopefully that we can get this thing these legislation pieces move forward in a bipartisan fashion. I think it'll make Kentucky a much better state. So I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Finally, throughout this session, the Attorney General's office will continue a call we started over a year ago when we analyzed then Senate Bill 1. And that call is to finally expand gaming here in Kentucky and to dedicate that tax revenue to fund our pension system. We're calling on the legislature to ultimately expand gaming to casino, to sports betting, to treat fantasy sports for what they are, and to prepare for online poker. We believe in this office, based on looking at other states, that there's up to $550 million a year in actual revenue we would receive that is going to other states. That can be used for pensions in Indiana or Pennsylvania. It can be used to build schools in Ohio or to address the drug epidemic in Missouri. It's time that we stepped up and we're able to provide a dedicated revenue stream to our pension system so we can keep that promised retirement to every single public servant, while at the same time not raising taxes on any single Kentuckian. So this is our legislative package, and these are some legislators who are champions for what's right for our families here in Kentucky. And again, it's just based on basic values, that every single family ought to be able to grow up in a safe neighborhood, free from violence, that no family should have to choose between buying groceries or paying the utility bill, and that we should be able to secure justice for every single Kentuckian that's been harmed. We're happy to take any questions.
On House Bill 44, the permanent fund, who would administer it? Who would decide where the money would go?
Right. So House Bill 44 has, I think, two very critical parts. And the first one is what we talked about. That's a requirement that all the funds are spent addressing the drug epidemic. But the second addresses timing. Because right now, if all the funds have to be appropriated during a budget session, we could bring in significant funds that could help people who are sick now, and it could have to wait almost up to 2 years to provide that help. So what it does is it creates a committee that is empowered by the legislature with the parameters that the legislature sets to provide that funding where it's needed. I believe that when this bill is debated, that there'll be debate on who should be on that committee, and that should be subject to a lot of discussion. But at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that those dollars can get out there where they're needed as quickly as possible.
Will that committee be attached to the AG's office?
Right now, in the draft, it is not. There is a representative from the AG's office that is involved, but there are representatives of leadership in the House and the Senate, representatives from the recovery, the treatment community, the prevention community, as well as law enforcement.
Do you have a guesstimate how much money you may be able to raise?
I don't. It's important to note that nothing we recover is going to bring anybody back, and we've all lost. And I don't know that it'll bring closure to anybody who's lost, but it does give us that potential transformational moment to move beyond this epidemic in our lifetime. But we shouldn't assume that it's all coming in at one time. We could tomorrow have a settlement that, again, we want to deploy as quickly as possible to help those people who are suffering right now.
You mentioned what you can about the bill that you have passed it or proposed to pass this off in the beginning hearing. The makeup of the legislature is the same as last time. How do you plan to get House bill votes?
We plan to continue to ask people to do the right thing. Now, there are children suffering every single day in Kentucky that are trafficked in every single community, whether they're represented by someone of one party or the other. We're going to be meeting with anybody who will meet with us. I know our partners are going to be pushing it as hard as they can. But at the end of the day, if it takes those that won't give it a hearing finding out that I'm more stubborn than they are, I'm going to continue to press it. You know, we talk about in this office doing the right thing every time, and continuing to press this legislation is the right thing. And they can reach out to so many different folks that have partnered with us to see how important this fight is. The hospitality industry, where we're trying to train every frontline hotel worker to report. UPS, which announced that they were going to train every delivery driver nationwide to recognize and report. None of those companies see this as partisan. They see this as a necessity. They see this as a way that they can truly help move us forward. And I believe that the industry itself, the trucking industry here in Kentucky, they've been supportive in the past, and they would testify for it. We've worked with them, and they want to empower their drivers to be agents of change, of building a better world.
With the bill that would give you the ability to do the multi-jurisdictional...
To ask for it, yes.
To ask for it. Have you talked to other people about this bill, other potential AG candidates who are coming up? And since you're not running for
Right.
AG, obviously, do you think that makes it any easier so long as it's passed the bill?
It might. And what it does say is that this bill is not about me. It's about the Attorney General's office having a tool to address crimes that we know are out there and ultimately end some institutional abuse that can occur in any institution once and for all. I believe that the legislation is appropriate and should satisfy any concerns because it has a number of checks and balances. Just to get the statewide grand jury, you have to go to the Supreme Court and petition them. The Supreme Court then evaluates it, and if they decide that we should move forward, they appoint a circuit judge to oversee it. And the circuit judge then oversees that grand jury, whether statewide or multi-county, and they are also a check. Then the prosecutions themselves don't occur in the AG's office. Jurisdiction is still there for the local prosecutor to take our findings, to take what we were able to secure through those grand juries and move them forward. So I believe that's something that our local officials should support, and that every AG candidate, if they can back up from any partisan fight of the day and actually look at the need and the reasonableness of it, should support it. And those that don't, we ought to ask and question whether or not they've looked at what the office does and what it needs to do, or if they're just playing electoral games.
Lieutenant Captain, on your bill, does it give any standards to the PSC to determine whether the rates can be affordable for the customers? How would that be determined?
Well, I don't know that we've defined affordability beyond the fact that they have to consider it. Right now, it's not even considered. And we were told in hearings last year when people would try to talk about the affordability of their electric bills that was not a factor they were permitted to consider. And while I felt like it could have been read to certainly include affordability, the PSC, under the parameters as they understood them, would tell those folks who would show up at public hearings that they weren't permitted to consider that. So this is to clear that up and make sure that they know they can. Thank you, Jack.
And affordability will ultimately be a determination that's reached by the PSC. In no way is this bill a criticism of the PSC. It's trying to give them more authority to consider areas that they currently may not believe that they can. But it also allows us to be able to provide the evidence of how any rate increase impacts the people that it's being levied against. And so I believe that this will only improve the hearings that are there, give those regulators more information, and help them make better decisions.
Does your
We'll get them all for you. Yes.
On a somewhat different topic,
Okay.
do you think Kentucky is too soft?
Yeah. I believe those comments are another example of why this governor is not fit for office.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah. I think it's an unfortunate mistake in my opinion. This country, something should have been said, shouldn't have been said, you know. You have to take into account what goes on as the kids stand at the bus stops. You know, I'm from Jefferson County, they close all the schools. It's bitter cold, it's killing cold, that's how cold it is out there. So to have that type of attitude, it's unfortunate.
Since we got into politics, I've got to ask the three legislators, have they made any endorsement in this year's governor's race? Does any one of them endorse the candidate yet today?
I haven't.
I don't want to done that publicly, but I think I'm standing next governor. That might answer your question.
You know, if I might be add a little something here. You know, you had asked earlier about, well, introducing this bill, how do you think that you'll get a fair hearing in that? All this is good legislation that we're sponsoring up here. And it needs, if somebody out there kicking and yelling and screaming, it never gets heard. And this is an important part of that. If we don't bring this to the public's ideal that what's going on out there, not every family is suffering from heroin, but it's affecting a lot of families. And you got to keep on punching. I had DUI legislation.
Right.
It took me 10 years to pass. That's worrisome. People are dying, and we're not doing anything about it. So these bills are all important to helping families, and we look forward to keep on. As long as I'm in the legislature, I'm going to be fighting that battle.
Thank you.